Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside David Corbin. Glad to have you with us to explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution. Those dirty fuels are burning. The earth's whole climate's churning. Clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill. Fossil fuels are cheap. Wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020 vision.
Happy 4th of July, Dave.
Same to you, Matt. We're one day away anyway to the 4th of July, right? So in good American fashion, we're going to a Rockies game today, where I think it's the only place in the country right now where you can take a family of four to a major league game for $28 total.
That's a deal. You can't do minor leagues for $7 a ticket these days, I don't think.
No, but I mean, it'll go up thereafter as soon as we order the first 3 hot dogs and 2 beers.
Right.
Another 100 there, but
yeah,
still going into it, it's only $28, but looks like it'll be a nice sunny day here in Colorado, and they play the Astros. And I don't really like the Astros. I've never really liked the Astros, but anyway, so I'm going to be rooting for the Rockies, rooting against the Astros.
Hey, it can happen.
It can happen. Once out of every 10 games, it can happen. The Rockies.
Right. That's right. Yeah, we're out in Western Pennsylvania at my parents' cabin on the lake, and as we often are for 4th of July, and having a great time. And actually, we're at a diner in Somerset, Pennsylvania this morning, and my son noticed on the wall there behind the bar this great sign. It says, "We are politically incorrect. We say Merry Christmas. We believe in one nation under God. We salute our flag and support our troops. If this is offensive, then leave." So, a little flavor of Western PA for you.
There you go. It's all. Yeah, that's a good part of America is right there.
Yep.
With you. So that's good. That's good.
Well, they also had the preamble of the Constitution, a big poster on their window, which I thought was pretty impressive. And they had the words of the pledge to the flag underneath the window sills. So they were all in.
They're in. Good.
Yeah.
It's a great time to celebrate. Great country to celebrate.
Yep.
And on that note, why are we celebrating it? I mean, this is a story I think of our series now. We want to keep a republic that should be kept and should be kept for good reasons and for good principles. And last week we covered the principle of equality, which we argued was the first principle of responsible citizenship and statesmanship. It's hard to be a nation of equals if you don't render to another their equality. For today, we move to the second principle of responsibility. Why is responsibility and how is responsibility tied to equality? And why together do they help form a great foundation for a Republican nation?
Yeah, I know you're going to talk a little more later about how we think about the word responsibility today. But as we understood in the book, and as I think we understand it just as in general, is that there's really something about what it means to be a human being here, that human beings are not a law to themselves. And one of the great debates of the last couple centuries has been a debate between those who believe human beings are autonomous, literally meaning self-law, or those who are subject to authority, and ultimately the authority of God. And if you go back to the Declaration of Independence, the most famous statement of this principle there in the preamble or the opening paragraph of the Declaration says that we are subject to the laws of nature and of nature's God. And there's a recognition that human beings can't just do as they please. In fact, the whole point of the Declaration is to give reasons to justify independence. We've told a story before, but yesterday, July 2nd, is Independence Day. That's the day when the resolution declaring independence was approved. But they spent 2 more days debating the fine language of Jefferson's draft of the Declaration of Independence because they wanted to get their statement of justification right. And they did that, as they say in that opening paragraph, because human beings have to give reasons for their actions. We live in a moral world, in a moral universe, under God and before other moral people. And so we can't just take up our guns and start shooting at people. Obviously, we can, do that physically, but we can't morally do that because we have to have a good reason for that. And so there's every difference between somebody who's just a murderer and who's taking human life without any responsibility, and a person who recognizes the tragedy of a situation where perhaps you're called upon to defend human life with violence. So, the whole framework of the Declaration is a recognition of that need for the American founding generation to explain why it was right for them to resist British authority.
Yeah, so I think that what we're celebrating in celebrating the founding tomorrow is their responsible use of human agency as statesmen. That they realize that human beings can make a variety of decisions, some good, some bad. But when you're making the decision to found a new nation, that you better make it upon bedrock principles. And those principles are not principles that simply you care about or that you like, but that they're principles grounded in reality. Because at the end of the day, the truth of reality is essential to their making their decision to declare their independence. And that's, I think, where we begin to get things wrong on these questions of responsibility, especially as we move forward into the 21st century, where reality becomes less and less essential to the overall equation of what makes for a responsible decision.
Right. There's nothing outside of me, nothing outside of my own feelings or desires or ideas that can critique those things. And that's why it's so offensive when somebody comes along that says, well, actually, there is a reality, there is a nature, there's a standard and a measure that you're accountable to. Because it's not just an intellectual argument that you're losing, perhaps, if you're on the wrong side of that kind of an argument, but you're thinking about it's an attack on you. It's an attack on your God, really, because you make yourself your own God. And so now your deity is on the line as somebody challenges the way you want to live your life or the decisions you want to make in various parts of that life.
Well, that certainly was the rendering of the issue back in 2010 when we wrote the book. The response to the abortion defense in Casey versus Planned Parenthood, this quote that we've often discussed, quote, "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. Beliefs about these matters could not define the attributes of personhood were they formed under compulsion of the state." That's in essence, that defining principle that reality is however you define it. Existence is however you define it. Meaning, the universe is however you define it. So it's the exact opposite, a rendering of responsibility, responsible statesmanship, responsible citizenship than the one given to us by the founders.
Yeah, it's a very different Declaration of Independence. It's an independence from any accountability, any authority. I mean, just think about the radical quality of some of that language. Defining one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. I mean, these are the most fundamental questions. What the justices are saying here is that liberty, at the heart of liberty, is the right to make your own definitions of those essential things. Now, this is not the liberty of the right to liberty in the Declaration of Independence. This is a very different notion of liberty. And the idea that the attributes of personhood would be subject to individual human judgment. Now, you play that out. I mean, it's really radical in its consequences. Right? No one is safe in a world where the person next to you can define at their own will you in or out of the human family. Obviously, the application here is abortion, and we think about this in terms of maybe the elderly and infirm or others who have diminished capacities or situations where that would make them more subject to the power of others. But really, the common murderer could appeal to a principle like this and say, look, you're calling it murder. I'm just saying that person was in my way, and I'm not even sure they are a person, actually.
Yeah, and it's interesting because back then when we were discussing this this definition, this newer definition of liberty, this newer declaration, we were talking about stem cell research and human cloning. So a lot of the discussion that we have in the chapter on responsibility has to do with science, technology, and society. Now, of course, you move forward from that time, 2010, to where we are now, 2025. You certainly have had developments along the lines of gay marriage, et cetera. So kind of a whole set of social issues, now transgendered rights, et cetera. But then I think there's an interesting tie between the stem cell research and human cloning that was going on back then and still going on today, and then the science of COVID just 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Because to me, Matt, it is really interesting that you can have a definition of liberty like this that is used, right, to suggest kind of unfettered autonomy.
Right.
However, you get to COVID, and in fact, what you have is the very compulsion of the state telling you, based upon defined science, that's the science, that you can or cannot do these things. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that an unfettered liberty can lead to, right, the unfettered abuse of power,
right,
that comes from it not being fettered, not being defined.
Yeah, no, that's a good observation. I think it's untenable. We can't literally have every person defining their own concept of existence, meaning the universe, etc. We can't do that. So if we're going to reject the authority of God, and we're going to reject the authority that is embedded in his creation through the law of nature and of nature's God, again, to use the language of the Declaration, then we're going to have some other God. And that became the science, right? And that was the way it was framed. Fauci was the representative of the science and therefore spoke with this authority. And the assumption was, whatever else we think about our lives, we want to extend them indefinitely. And therefore, if we have to do X, Y, or Z to protect ourselves, then that has to happen, because nothing else could possibly weigh in the balance against safety and protection against the dangers of this disease to myself and to others. And so whether it was quality of schooling, whether it was social interactions, whether it was religious observance, all those things to one degree or another were weighed in the balance and found wanting over against the demands of the science.
Right. So here you have a right to define your own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life, but you don't have the right to choose whether or not you want to take a vaccine. So your rights, right, are granted unfettered in the transcendent realm of morality, of reality, of truth, of philosophic right. However, you do not have rights in the world of the immanent, because your rights in the world of the immanent are defined or limited based upon everyone having to sign on to this idea that simply staying alive is the definition of what good life is within this world.
Right. So I think, as we think of further applications of this, one of the debates that happened just this last week, as the big, beautiful bill was working its way through the Senate, was some action taken on an attempt to ban state regulations of AI. So it was a provision that was actually in the House bill that at least some members of the House said they didn't realize was even in there. But it would have given a blanket 10-year ban on state level regulations of AI. And there's, there have been some legal action probably around defining, what was a regulation of AI, what wasn't, what was just, consumer protection or something of that sort. But it was very strong. And the Wall Street Journal article I read said it was even more than the tech titans wanted. So it was really, really good. And it looked like it was in a good position to go through the Senate as well. But then Republican opposition arose to it, and it was skinny down to a 5-year ban with some child safety and copyright carve-outs. And then it became clear, even with that, it wasn't going to go through. And so ultimately, the lead sponsor of it was Ted Cruz, and he agreed to allow everybody more or less to just withdraw and vote against it. And so it went down 99-1. Tom Tillis was the only one that voted for it. once it became clear it couldn't pass. But it was close. It was something that seemed to be on the knife's edge, and there were a number of articles written about this. And the idea was, do you want states to be able to try to feel their way through this new world that's emerged over the last couple of years and try to protect children, try to provide limitations to what AI can do, both in terms of its capacities, the way it takes in information and processes that information, or do you want to say, well, we'll do that if we're going to do that only at the federal level? And we want a lot of states to make their own judgments about that. It's one of those things. It's inconvenient for this to be at a state level because information on the internet travels quickly, obviously, across state lines without thinking about it. So we want a federal level regulation, but there was no regulation forthcoming in this particular legislation. So when and if that would happen, who knows what it would look like. So ultimately, Republicans and Democrats, obviously, with the number of votes there in the Senate, teamed together against this, allowing states to make decisions, to pass legislation concerning AI and to begin to kind of carve out some areas of regulation if they want to moving forward.
Well, I'm guessing what happened, of course, of this bill's history was that there were probably some really excellent lobbyists who were hired in Washington, D.C. to talk with these various senators and representatives. They were probably advised that, listen, there's a lot that needs to be done in this area, but if you allow individual states to take up these questions on their own, it's going to become messy. Of course,
right.
The advantage for the lobbyists working for the firm here is that better to bring everything to DC and have it worked out there, because then you have access to the conversation, the table.
Right.
But I think that probably along the same lines, when these senators were being advised by these lobbyists, they were being told, let's just take kind of a responsible approach to AI. Now, responsibility is the theme of today's show, but responsible can be defined in terms of, let's be cautious, let's be moderate, let's not be too judgy, let's kind of wait and see, and we'll do the least amount that we need to, because we don't want to get in that area where we're kind of condemning these things to too great a degree, and in which we have too great a certitude on these matters, because that would be irresponsible, right? It'd be irresponsible to be certain, or irresponsible to make a judgment. And here again, Matt, I think we begin to see the language of that Casey, come out, right? Well, we've got to just let things define themselves as they move forward, and if they have, some good serviceable benefits for society, let it go. And I'm not saying that AI cannot have those things,
right.
But I'm saying that the tendency is to define responsibility in respectable terms rather than in right terms these days.
That's right. And so to be a responsible person is to kind of follow the norms, go along with the conventions, be somebody who's predictable, who can be counted on. And, none of those qualities are bad in and of themselves.
Right.
It just, we have to have a bigger standard, right? We're talking about responsibility in this ultimate sense of recognizing the limits as human beings that we all bump up against as we understand our relationship to God and to the order that he's established. So maybe let's connect the dots a little bit here. So why is AI a topic worthy of discussion under this heading? Well, one of the things that we think about when we talk about responsibility is the government's role to make moral judgments. And, I remember when we were growing up, college age, and maybe in graduate school, one of the most common claims you would hear in politics was, you can't legislate morality. And the idea was that it was wrong to legislate, usually concerning abortion was the primary issue that was applied to, but it was meant, I think, in general as a principle that would affect homosexuality and other issues that were current at that time. And it was always a false statement. I mean, obviously you can do it, and obviously you have to do it because every law has a moral principle behind it. But I think what we're trying to say here is that the science, the AI, right, these claims for human autonomy, my own sense of identity, all these things are rightfully subject of moral restraint. And legislation is one of the ways you apply that moral restraint. Not the only way. Right? That can happen through family, it can happen through church, it can happen through other organizations. But law is sometimes the only way that certain boundaries can be enforced. And those boundaries which are real need to be enforced. So I think we can talk about this more in some level of detail when we talk about maybe applying it to the area of AI and see how this idea of responsibility, that's this more conventional notion, really doesn't get far enough down the road to an appropriate way of dealing with these moral questions that these new technologies raise.
Yeah, just an anecdote on this. So we live in a neighborhood in Colorado Springs, really nice, older neighborhood. Roads are never good. They haven't been good, but they've paved our road going toward our house. And I said to my wife, like, Katie, they're going to be driving down this road at 60 miles an hour now. We're going to have to pull out really quickly.
Yeah.
So I was going out last night. They put a stop sign there. A stop sign is legislating morality.
Right.
A stop sign says stop because if you go too fast, you're going to put the life of another at risk, whether it's another driver on the other side of the road or a pedestrian on the side of the road. With regard to computers and AI and internet searches, we have very few stop signs. In fact, we have just green lights, right? We have elements of the programming and the coding where it just says go, 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 get drawn in
Right.
faster at a higher rate for longer each day. So how good is that for the human being? Right? How good is that? And much like a stop sign on a road, what would it mean to begin to put some stop signs, right, along the roads of technology, AI, et cetera? Not that they can't be used, but that they could be used responsibly, which is what we're talking about today.
Right. I think this really takes us back to Aristotle in the opening chapter of his Nicomachean Ethics. He situates politics among various other studies, various other arts, and he calls it the master art. And he calls it the master art because politics provides rules for other arts. And he recognizes that it's appropriate for politics to take notice of other things that are happening, right? So, it's often the case when it comes to technology that those who are most enthusiastic about it want to be free to do as they please. And they sort of see that as a fundamental right to pursue their science or technology in whatever direction it leads. And, we hope for the best. We assume that they're good people. They want good things, but that's really wrong and inappropriate for legislation to get involved in those kinds of things. And Aristotle's argument is, no, that's not the case, that every art has to be understood within certain boundaries. And again, it's the job of politics to establish and to enforce those boundaries. Now, that can be badly done. It can be arbitrary. It can be self-interested in a way that promotes the good of those with power. It can be just inefficient, setting up roadblocks or putting stop signs in places where they don't belong. Halfway down a block, you don't want a stop sign. So obviously this can be done badly, but that's no reason to then give up the task. And so I think one of the things that's happened in the last few years is there's been some good thinking about how do we protect the human, protect the family, protect human dignity and distinctiveness in light of these advances that are happening very, very rapidly in artificial intelligence. I work in the technology space, and it's probably every week or two that some new advance makes our job easier to some degree, but also adds new complications, right? As you think about what can the new AI agent do and how can it help in this way and what will it do? And this is rapidly happening. I mean, I can't imagine a 10-year window without doing anything about this, right? In 10 years, we went from the first chat GPT, that was just 3 years ago. So multiply that by 3 times and how many advances we have in 10 years, that would be incredible to say we're not going to have any regulation for 10 years, just going to wait, see what happens. Well, who knows how far down the road we would be toward all kinds of dystopian realities by that point if there's not some guardrails that are applied. So our old friend from King's College, Michael Toscano, works for the Institute for Family Studies. He's the president, I believe. And he wrote an article with his colleague there, Jared Hayden, talking about how to think about protection of the family in the context of AI and technology more broadly.
Yeah, and I think here he is calling upon the Trump administration to really stay the course in what it had promised originally and how it was going to look at these technologies and try to consider these technologies from the vantage point of encouraging human dignity.
Yeah, I think in the end, there was some silent support of President Trump for removing that measure from the Senate version of the Big Beautiful Bill. And so it sounds like, if the Wall Street Journal is correct, that he was ultimately pushing for opportunity for regulation there, but it wasn't clear that that would be the case. And, you just think about some of these things that are happening at the state level, very, very sensible regulations. One example in Utah that he cites prohibits mental health chatbots from targeting users with advertising. So, you're exploiting people that are suffering. And there's a number of these things that have arisen around child welfare, bots that are meant to be your friend, and yet this very strange, AI. It's a disembodied voice that's just sort of speaking to you and acting in a very friendly way. I mean, people are making real attachments to these things, and to just say, well, we're just going to let that go, however that goes. This is an irresponsible decision if we're not going to be able to at least have some state level regulation on these things. That's going to leave a lot of people in a very dangerous position.
I'm going to be sitting there smoking my cigar with my 4 other bot friends around fire,
Right.
sipping scotch. The only friends I can get. No, kidding aside. Yeah, I mean, I listened to this conversation with Peter Thiel yesterday. I think it was an interview from a New York Times reporter, and it was really interesting because he kind of got into the mind of kind of the techno right and kind of gave you a good description of how they view things. And they're very interested in a couple things: doing things faster, fast.
Right.
To make things faster is kind of the heart of technology. You look at the modern age; our planes are faster, our cars are faster, and there's just an incredible development over time where things speed up. But the second thing is this kind of idea of longer, of immortality that a lot of these people are drawn to. And I think that their vision of what human progress looks like is so bound up into their technology that they forget what is actually humane.
Right.
That technology, which is an extension of human ingenuity, becomes what is human, but they don't see its departure, right, from the actual human being, the actual human entity. So, so he did a really good, excellent job of kind of defining that and making the suggestion. And I think he's one of very few people in this realm that, much like Aristotle, right, that there are a whole varying set of standards that we ought to be looking for when we judge whether something is good or bad. But he argues that not many people in my realm of things judge things that way.
And you certainly don't, that's not the headline grabbing claims coming out of Silicon Valley. So there was a statement put together by Toscano, among others, called A Future for the Family, which was signed on by a number of impressive scholars and teachers.
I didn't sign it, Matt.
They didn't ask you, huh? They didn't ask me either.
Ask me.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, there's some pretty good names on there. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, they proposed 10 different items, guiding principles, they call them. It says for empowering families through technology. And we're not going to read all 10 of these, and probably don't agree with all 10 of them. But there's some interesting things here to think about. I think some things that track very well with the conversation we've been having around the idea of responsibility. So they lead off with the first one, which I think is really critical and very much on point with our earlier discussion. Respect the natural cycle of mortality by healing or mitigating chronic disease rather than pursuing radical life extension, and palliate the suffering of terminal illness rather than artificially accelerating death. Recognize that there's good use of technology. Obviously, we're grateful for the developments that have made it so much more survivable when you have a cancer diagnosis or things of this sort. And more progress along those lines is an attractive proposition if it's done responsibly. We talked briefly about stem cell research earlier, and of course, that's one of the things that people are willing to run right over, right? Those tiny lives in order to cure diseases or have the prospect of curing diseases. But pursued responsibly, that's a good use of technology and science, rather than these radical efforts at life extension, these visions of immortality, uploading your psyche somehow into the cloud or something of this sort. These visions you find quite commonly in the Silicon Valley.
Yep.
world, and that is this kind of autonomous quest for eternal life that really rightly is rejected by this statement.
Yeah, I think it definitely, this first principle, gets to a lot of the conversation we were even having last week on equality, because it really underscores the importance of human dignity, and I think it does so in a good way, right? Disease is an awful thing, and so if we can heal or mitigate it, great. That renders greater dignity to the person involved. But to what degree do we maintain dignity when we want to radically undo the cycle of life and death,
Right.
mortality and immortality? I think what's going on there is that you're really trying in a human way to fulfill a promise that is only fulfilled by your resurrection in Christ.
Exactly.
But what these folks are after, right, is an artificial resurrection in the cloud,
Right.
rather than a resurrection in Christ.
Right. And on the other hand, sometimes really providing what used to be called physician-assisted suicide, but really now you've got these, suicide machines that don't really require physician's assistance. There's a technological assistance, I guess you could say, but that too is becoming something that's rapidly emerging, and we're seeing laws that are affirming that a right to ending your own life on the terms that you desire. Again, another claim at autonomy, and something else that they're rightfully opposing in this statement.
One of the principles I like, Matt, it's a little more kind of commonsensical, but I think it's very much in line with what it would mean to live within a lowercase r Republican society. So principle 6, legislate toward a restored Republican culture in a digital age by giving citizens ownership over their own data, protect privacy by blocking the transformation of everyday appliances into surveillance systems,
Yeah.
and require platforms to build robust tools that can give users transparency and choices about the algorithms that construct their feeds. But just in that one alone, if you just worked on that front, so much good could be done. Imagine if you could go to a site and look at what data they have on Matt Parks or David Corbin in terms of,
Right.
so how are they trying to figure you out? Where are you connected to this thing? Where are the traps, et cetera? But also just kind of building up a greater transparency about how much we are hooked on these things through
Yeah.
their feeds.
Right. And of course, the algorithms are designed to make us get hooked and to keep us hooked. But yeah, I like this one about transforming everyday appliances into surveillance systems, right? Just, smart technology everywhere. I remember, I didn't have a smartphone. I was a rather late adopter until I had to fly to Detroit to speak at a school up there. And there was a problem with our flight, and I couldn't do anything. Everybody else is on their smartphone who's, having to switch flights and rebook and whatever. And I was stuck because all I had was a dumb phone. And so I had to find the counter where you used to go for these kinds of things. And they weren't really well prepared to help me. And I realized that at that point that they'd kind of designed these systems for people that have smartphones. And if you don't have a smartphone, you're in a lot of trouble. And that's become more and more the case as you work your way through these systems, where it's just assumed everybody is going to have their own individual smartphone that can do various things and download this app. And so if you don't have that, you're really restricted in a number of important areas of life. Well, I'd like to maybe conclude this section by just reading the statement they have near the end of this overall document, which I think is a nice summary of what they're trying to do and how it ties into the things that we're concerned about with this episode. It says, these guiding principles will lead to deep and needed reform of our existing technological order. Whenever technology ceases to supplement other human goods and threatens to become a substitute for them, we are in danger. All the more so when technology attacks human life at its root by subverting and replacing the family. So I think that's a nice application of this broader principle, that we use politics and we use law as necessary to enforce certain norms. And of course, this takes us back to our first conversation about equality, to protect the dignity of the individual human being. That is non-negotiable. And so wherever that's attacked, whether it's by technology or whether it's by individual assailants or by other systems or institutions, that's an appropriate place for the state to be involved and to protect those guardrails. Again, these aren't principles that we're saying come from the state. The state's not defining the boundaries here. The state's not becoming the master in this relationship, but recognizing that all, including the government itself, are under these principles established by God that define the order of human life. Then it's appropriate for the government with the power of the sword to use legislation to make sure that none of these technologies or other items we're talking about compromise that inherent human dignity.
Can't say that I'm optimistic, Matt, about the state being able to get this very complicated issue right.
Yeah, agreed, Dave. I think it's going to be challenging. I think we've really lost our ability to do this kind of moral reasoning in public. We're not comfortable with moral arguments. We're not comfortable with making claims about better and worse. And we're not comfortable with making fine judgments about things. These are matters that are going to require careful reflection. This is not easy. You don't just, well, let's just ban AI. Well, that's not really going to work.
Right.
So there's going to have to be some real thoughtful work on the part of legislators, and really on the part of legislators, not on the part of agencies that fill in the gaps. Right. We need to have a public debate about this. We need to have people that are thoughtfully, obviously, you use your staff if they have expertise to help, but we need members of Congress out there making arguments and debating these things so that there's a real opportunity for reflection on this. And those are muscles we've not exercised much lately.
Right. And those are the muscles that define human responsibility and almost allow us to be superhuman in some way when we can actually do moral reasoning and do it right. It's not easy. It's not, You can't chat GPT these things.
Right.
There's a lot of not yet. There's a lot of reading, rendering, discussion that has to take place. But it needs to be done if we're going to live in a moral world, which we do live in that moral world. But if we're going to coincide with reality, we're going to need to be able to do this better.
Yeah. Don't ask ChatGPT about how best to regulate ChatGPT.
Exactly.
All right, we'll leave it there for this week. Next week, or actually next episode, we will take up the subject of honor, our third principle in our book, Keeping Our Republic from 2010. And of course, the lines are open, so feel free to make your order on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. We're hoping to get that $20 check we talked about last time for our royalties. But now we've got Tocqueville's crystal balls to wrap up the show. A reminder, of course, last time we made our picks for the 4th of July hot dog eating contest. We assume Joey Chestnut wins. Dave says 80 hot dogs tomorrow. I say 65. By the time you hear this, you'll know the answer, but we're still waiting to find out here Thursday, late morning. Our new crystal ball prediction is going to be for Wimbledon. So I'm glad we didn't do this 2 weeks ago, because at that point, we didn't know that there was going to be a bloodbath of seeded players in the first round. 23
Crazy.
64 seeded players lost in the very first round, and others have lost since. So now we're kind of into the third round at this point. It's a little bit easier. We're going to pick our two finalists and our ultimate winner on both the men's and the women's side of the draw. Dave, you want to go first?
Sure. So I don't know if you were able to watch any of the French Open final between Sinner and Alvaraz, but it may have been the greatest tennis match I've watched or I've seen in person. And it's just, tennis always delivers on these great rivalries. It just has for so long, whether it's Nadal and Djokovic and Federer or McEnroe and Borg. There's always 2 to 3 great players who are just in their prime that just make these events so great to watch. And so I watched that. And these two players are amazing. I just think it's going to be a final of Sinner and Alvarez again. I think any good rivalry you need one person to win once, another person to, kind of win the next time. So I think Sinner takes this over Alvarez in the men's final. And then in the women's final, I'm going to go for Sabalenka, who's the number 1 seed. I have her playing, I'm going to do a little Chris Berman here, Elena Rybakina, who's from Russia. So I think Prime Rybakina takes her second Wimbledon title. She won in 22. was in the quarters in 23, semis in 24. So she gets back to where she was in 22. Elena Rybakina defeats Sabalenka in the women's final.
Okay, very nice. Well, we always make our picks independently, but we often overlap anyway. So I have the same two men's finalists. Sinner's never made it past the quarters at Wimbledon. Alvaraz has won the last two, so that would make you think Alvaraz would be the favorite, certainly, if they were to meet in the final. But I'm going to, like you, go with Sinner anyway. I think he finds a way to get past Alvaraz. It doesn't seem like Alvaraz is maybe at his top of his game in the early rounds, and so maybe there's an opening there for Sinner to sneak by him and win his first Wimbledon. Women's side, I also have Sabalenka in the final, but I'm picking an American. So Emma Navarro, the bottom half of the draw was completely decimated. So the highest seeds left are like 7, 8, and 10. She's done well in majors recently, made the quarterfinals at Wimbledon last time, semifinals at the US Open, quarterfinals at Australian, lost in the first one at the French, but clay court and grass court are just about opposites. So I think she's got a fair shot at making to the finals. I'm going to pick the American, the upset to win. So I'm going to say we're going to have a red, white, and blue.
Very 4th of July.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, I try to do that with my picks, right? I did that with Kentucky Derby. I'm going USA here as well. So, I don't get them right, but at least I'm on the right side of things.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Belarus versus Russia.
Yeah, that's.
I got USA against Russia. I'm not picking Russia, but.
Or
Belarus.
I gotcha. Or Belarus.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for this time around. Thank you as always for listening. And if you want to reach out to us, you can contact us at democracyinamerica@gmail.com. Look forward to talking to you next time. Happy 4th.
2020 vision.